Right, it's Dr. G Eke here. This is a brief talk to just clarify the topic of leadership. Now, the reason why I'm trying to make this brief explanation is because there's an awful lot of confusion amongst so many people and a vast, array of individuals and intellectuals when it comes to the topic of leadership. Now, the first thing to say is I defined leadership as the social complement of fellowship. All right. Now, there's an awful lot of confusion between leadership and pioneership. Now, pioneership obviously has a substantial component of leadership. And empirically, that is correct. Pioneership is always leadership. But leadership is not always pioneership. Now, this is where the confusion comes. A pioneer is a leader. That's true, because the pioneer is the person who begins or starts a project. So clearly the element of leadership is there. But a leader doesn't always have to be a pioneer. And a lot of times people talk about leadership, and more specifically in terms of political leadership, and they feel that leadership is to do with personality. Now, this is obviously erroneous, and the reason for that is because whilst there is an element of personality prerequisite when it comes to leadership, interestingly, it is not the most important aspect of it. Leadership basically has two very important aspects. And the word that underpins the whole thing about leadership is the word genuine. So, you need genuine willpower. That's the first thing. And then you need genuine compatibility with the fellowship. Leadership is less of personality. It is more of a social issue. So, leadership is the capacity to complement the fellowship as a social construct. Now, a lot of people, once they've got the genuine willpower and they've got the genuine compatibility with the fellowship, they would qualify to be leaders. They don't have to be pioneers. problem we face when it comes to the difficulties in obtaining leadership is because we tend to ignore the fellowship, the people. If the leader is not socially compatible with the fellowship, you basically do not have a leader. Leadership is just not going to be feasible. It's not going to work. So if you have a scenario where, for instance, you take the Tetela community, which is in the Congo area, and you want the Ngbandi person to be the leader of the Tetela people, well, you already have a lack of compatibility. So from the get-go, you are struggling already. And you are highly unlikely to achieve anything in the semblance of leadership with that sort of arrangement. So your social arrangement is extremely important. You cannot have leadership in the absence of compatibility. Even if the so-called leader has got the, genuine willpower. But the minute you lack the genuine compatibility with the fellowship, well, that's it. Leadership is gone. It's gone. You don't have it. And this is something we need to understand. It is practically impossible to have a leader that has nothing to do with the community, by ancestry, by origin, and perhaps even in terms of their residence. Nothing to do with the community, and the community has its own unique culture. It has its own ancestral arrangements. It has its own history. You can't just barge in from somewhere and become the leader. That is a significant incompatibility, and it doesn't work. So let us get this correct. The reason why most of the time you don't get the leadership you talk about a lot, and this particularly goes to people in West Africa and some other African countries and places as well. Unfortunately, the configuration, the arrangement is such that you just cannot get the right leadership, because you are bringing people who have nothing in connection with the indigenous community. The chances of you getting a leader from within the indigenous community for that indigenous community is a lot higher. That is more plausible with reality. It is extremely unreal and utopian to expect somebody who has practically no connections with that homeland, with that language, with that culture, with those people, someone of a completely different ethnicity to come in from nowhere and perhaps doesn't even live there. That's not going to work. To be the overall decision maker, that is terrible. That in itself is a sign of dictatorship. where you have nothing to do with the people, but you're making the decision for them. That's just part of what colonialism is. It's you dictate over a people you have nothing in common with. And maintaining that sort of order is just a disaster, basically. And you can, continue to waste your time forever, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work because you are ignoring the simple fact and reality.